Jake Martinez pushed open the door to his apartment and stepped inside, shaking the rain from his jacket. The Neo-Tokyo University campus had been hit by another sudden storm, and his afternoon engineering class had been cancelled when the power went out. He was 3 hours earlier than usual, which meant he might actually have some quiet time to work on his quantum mechanics assignment before his alien roommate Crix returned from his cultural studies seminar. The apartment was supposed to be empty, but Jake heard a strange humming sound coming from the living room. He frowned and set his backpack down quietly by the door. Crix was always so predictable with his schedule, attending every class and spending exactly 2 hours in the university library afterward. The Vortak were known for their rigid adherence to routine, and in the 8 months they had been living together, Crix had never deviated from his pattern. Jake moved carefully down the hallway, the humming growing louder with each step. There was also a blue light flickering under the living room door, far brighter than their usual apartment lighting. He had seen Crix use some basic Vortak technology before, mostly just communication devices and translation tools, but nothing that would create light like that. As he got closer to the door, Jake could hear other sounds mixed with the humming. There were sharp clicking noises, like metal hitting metal very fast, and occasional low whooshing sounds that reminded him of air being displaced. His curiosity got the better of him, and he pressed his ear against the door. What he heard made his blood run cold. There were voices speaking in what sounded like military commands, but not in any human language. The words were sharp and aggressive, filled with urgency. Between the commands, Jake could hear the sound of something large moving very quickly, accompanied by what sounded like weapons fire. Jake knew he should just go to his room and pretend he hadn't heard anything, but something about the situation felt wrong. Crix had always been secretive about his past, claiming he was just a regular student from the Vortak home world. But the sounds coming from the living room suggested something very different. Moving as quietly as possible, Jake knelt down and peered through the gap under the door. What he saw made him gasp and quickly cover his mouth with his hand. The entire living room had been transformed into what looked like a three-dimensional battlefield. Holographic projections filled the space from floor to ceiling, showing a detailed landscape that looked disturbingly similar to human military installations Jake had seen in documentaries. The projections were so realistic that Jake could see individual buildings, vehicles, and even what appeared to be human soldiers moving around the base. But it was Crix that truly shocked him. His roommate, who normally moved with the careful, measured steps typical of Vortak civilians, was now moving like a trained killer. Crix wore form-fitting armor that Jake had never seen before, and his usually pale crystalline skin seemed to shimmer with an energy that made him look dangerous and predatory. The gentle academic that Jake knew was gone, replaced by something that moved with lethal precision and inhuman speed. As Jake watched, Crix engaged multiple holographic opponents that looked exactly like human soldiers. His movements were fluid and deadly, using combat techniques that seemed designed specifically for fighting humans. He anticipated their tactics, countered their weapons, and moved through their defenses like he had done it 1,000 times before. The most disturbing part was how good Crix was at it. Every attack was perfectly timed, every defensive move was flawless, and every counterattack was devastatingly effective. This wasn't someone learning to fight humans for the first time. This was someone who had extensive training and experience in human combat scenarios. Jake's mind raced as he tried to process what he was seeing. The Vortak had been among the first alien species to welcome humanity into the Galactic Federation 15 years ago. They had been presented as peaceful scholars and scientists, eager to share knowledge and culture with the newest member of galactic society. But the creature he was watching bore no resemblance to the peaceful academic species that humans had been told about. As the holographic simulation continued, Jake noticed details that made his situation even more troubling. Crix had scars along his arms and neck that Jake had never seen before, usually hidden by his loose clothing. More alarming were what appeared to be cybernetic implants integrated into his spine and skull, glowing faintly with the same blue light that filled the room. The simulation scenario changed, and Jake watched as Crix practiced infiltration techniques on what looked like a human space station. He moved through corridors that Jake recognized as standard human architectural designs, avoiding security systems that were clearly based on human technology, and neutralizing human guards with techniques that seemed designed to be silent and efficient. Jake realized he was witnessing military training scenarios, but not just any training. These were specific anti-human combat simulations, detailed enough to suggest extensive intelligence gathering and preparation. The implications were terrifying. As he watched, transfixed by the deadly ballet playing out before him. Jake's elbow bumped against the small decorative plant that sat on the floor next to the door. The pot wobbled and fell over with a soft thud, spilling soil across the hallway floor. The effect was immediate and terrifying. All movement in the living room stopped instantly. The holographic projections flickered and disappeared, plunging the apartment back into normal lighting. In the sudden silence, Jake could hear his own heart pounding in his chest. Then Crix's head turned toward the door with a movement that was definitely not human. It was too fast, too precise, and carried with it a predatory alertness that made every instinct in Jake's body scream at him to run. Through the gap under the door, Jake could see Crix's feet moving toward him with the same deadly grace he had displayed during the combat simulation. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty in his movement. This was a predator investigating a potential threat. Jake held his breath and remained perfectly still, hoping against hope that Crix would assume the noise had been caused by something else. But as the footsteps stopped directly in front of the door, Jake knew his presence had been detected. The door handle began to turn slowly, and Jake realized that his life was about to change forever. The door opened slowly, and Jake found himself looking up at his roommate from his position on the floor. But this wasn't the Crix he knew. The gentle academic was gone, replaced by something that radiated controlled danger. The cybernetic implants were still glowing faintly, and his crystalline skin had a harder edge that made him look like a weapon rather than a person. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Jake remained frozen on his knees next to the overturned plant, while Crix stood in the doorway evaluating the situation with eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of Jake's position and potential threat level. Finally, Crix stepped back and gestured for Jake to enter the living room. His voice, when he spoke, carried none of the uncertainty that usually characterized his English. Instead, it was clear and commanding, with an authority that suggested he was used to being obeyed. "We need to talk," Crix said simply. Jake got to his feet on shaking legs and followed his roommate into the living room. The space looked normal again, with no sign of the sophisticated holographic battlefield that had filled it moments before. But Jake could still feel the energy in the air, and he noticed that Crix's armor had been replaced by his usual casual clothing so quickly that it seemed impossible. They sat across from each other on the couch, and Jake waited for an explanation that he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. Crix studied him for several more seconds before speaking, and Jake got the uncomfortable feeling that he was being assessed for something. "How much did you see?" Crix asked. Jake considered lying, but something about the way Crix was looking at him suggested that wouldn't be wise. "I saw you fighting humans in some kind of simulation. You were really good at it." Crix nodded as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. "I am not just an exchange student, Jake. I am a former combat specialist from the Vortak Defense Corps, assigned to Earth for intelligence gathering and threat assessment." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. Everything he thought he knew about his roommate, about the Vortak species, about humanity's place in the Galactic Federation, suddenly seemed questionable. "Threat assessment?" Jake managed to ask. Crix leaned forward, and for a moment his expression softened into something that resembled the academic Jake had known. When humanity first made contact with the Federation 15 years ago, many species were concerned about your potential impact on galactic stability. Humans have a reputation for being unpredictable, aggressive, and rapidly adaptive. Some Federation members worried that allowing humans full membership might destabilize the carefully maintained peace we have enjoyed for centuries. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "So you've been studying us to see if we're dangerous?" "Not just me," Crix admitted. "Multiple species have been conducting what you might call evaluations of human capabilities and intentions. The simulations you saw were based on real tactical data about human military installations, combat techniques, and defensive strategies. We needed to understand how humans fight, how they think, and how they might respond to various scenarios." The implications were staggering. Jake realized that humanity's integration into the Galactic Federation hadn't been the peaceful welcome they had been told about. Instead, they had been under constant surveillance and evaluation by species that viewed them as potential threats. "And what did you conclude?" Jake asked, not sure he wanted to hear the answer. For the first time since opening the door, Crix smiled, and it was the same gentle expression Jake remembered from their early conversations. "That everything we thought we knew about humans was wrong." Crix stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the city lights of Neo-Tokyo. When I arrived on Earth, I expected to find a primitive, aggressive species that posed a clear threat to galactic peace. I had studied your wars, your history of violence, your tendency toward conflict. I was prepared to recommend strict limitations on human expansion and development. He turned back to Jake, and his expression was thoughtful. Instead, I found something completely unexpected. Yes, humans can be aggressive when threatened, but you're also incredibly adaptable, creative, and emotionally intelligent in ways that most species cannot match. You solve problems in ways that our tactical computers cannot predict or understand. Jake wasn't sure whether to feel flattered or terrified. But you were still training to fight us. I was maintaining my combat readiness, Crix corrected. But with each month I spent on Earth, with each conversation we had, with each problem I watched you solve in ways that defied conventional logic, I became more convinced that humanity represents an opportunity rather than a threat. Crix moved back to the couch and sat down, his posture more relaxed than Jake had seen it in months. Your species has something that most of us have lost over the centuries of peaceful coexistence. You have the ability to think outside established parameters, to find solutions that shouldn't work but do, and to adapt to changing circumstances faster than anyone thought possible. That sounds like you're saying we're useful, Jake said, not sure whether to feel proud or insulted. I'm saying you're essential, Crix replied seriously. The galaxy has become comfortable with predictable solutions and established procedures. But comfort can lead to stagnation, and stagnation can lead to vulnerability. Humanity brings something fresh and dynamic that we need. Jake felt some of his tension beginning to ease, but new concerns were taking its place. You said multiple species were evaluating us. What did the others conclude? Crix's expression darkened. Not all of them reached the same conclusions I did. There are still factions within several species that view humanity as an unacceptable risk. They believe that human unpredictability and rapid development will eventually threaten the established order of the Federation. What does that mean for us? It means that the evaluation period is not over, Crix said quietly. There are still tests being conducted, still assessments being made. Some of them are more subtle than others, designed to look like accidents or natural challenges. But they're all designed to measure human responses under stress. Jake felt his blood run cold again. Are you saying that some of the problems human colonies have been having aren't accidents? Crix met his eyes directly. I'm saying that not everything that appears to be coincidence actually is. And I'm saying that some of the species conducting these evaluations are hoping that humanity will fail. The weight of this revelation settled over Jake like a heavy blanket. Humanity wasn't just trying to find its place in a peaceful galactic community. They were being tested by species that had the power to determine their future, and some of those species were actively hoping they would fail. Why are you telling me this? Jake asked. Crix was quiet for a long moment before answering. Because I believe humanity deserves to know what you're facing. And because I think you're going to need all the help you can get. Over the next few days, Jake found it almost impossible to concentrate on his classes. Every time he looked at Crix, he saw not just his alien roommate, but a trained military operative who had been sent to evaluate humanity's worthiness to exist in the galaxy. The knowledge sat in his stomach like a cold stone, making normal conversation feel surreal and forced. Crix seemed to understand his struggle and gave him space to process the revelation. But on the fourth day after their conversation, Jake came home to find his roommate sitting at their small dining table with what looked like a collection of holographic displays floating in the air around him. I think you need to see this, Crix said without looking up from the data streams he was reviewing. Jake approached cautiously and saw that the displays contained what appeared to be official Federation documents, communication logs, and detailed reports written in various alien languages. The translation software was working overtime to convert everything into English, but even with the translations, much of the technical and military terminology was difficult to understand. What am I looking at? Jake asked. Evidence, Crix replied, manipulating one of the displays to bring it closer. I've been accessing classified Federation files through my Defense Corps clearance, looking for information about the human evaluation program. What I found is more extensive than I expected. The display Crix had highlighted showed a timeline of events affecting human settlements and installations over the past 5 years. Each entry was marked with different symbols and codes that Jake didn't recognize, but the pattern was clear enough to make his blood run cold. These are all the accidents and natural disasters that have affected human colonies and ships, Crix explained. Equipment failures on mining stations, system malfunctions on transport vessels, communication breakdowns during critical operations, even some of the pirate attacks on Outer Rim settlements. Jake stared at the data, realizing what Crix was implying. "You're saying these weren't accidents?" "I'm saying that when you look at the timing, the specific systems that failed, and the types of challenges each incident created, the pattern suggests coordinated testing rather than random misfortune," Crix said. He brought up another display showing detailed technical analyses. "Look at this." The new display showed the Europa mining station incident from 2 years ago, when a cascade of equipment failures had left 300 human miners stranded with failing life support systems. Jake remembered the story from the news feeds, how it had been hailed as an example of human ingenuity when the miners had managed to improvise repairs using salvaged parts and creative engineering. The official report blamed the failures on a combination of solar radiation and equipment age, Crix continued. "But look at this technical analysis." The display zoomed in on specific components and failure patterns. Even with Jake's engineering background, the details were complex, but Crix's explanation made the implications clear. The failures occurred in a sequence that would create maximum stress on human problem-solving abilities while still leaving room for potential solutions. It's exactly the kind of scenario that our tactical computers would design to test adaptive capabilities under pressure. Jake felt sick. "How many people died?" "None," Crix said, and his tone suggested this was significant. "In fact, that's one of the most interesting patterns in the data. Every test scenario was designed to be survivable if the subjects demonstrated sufficient ingenuity and adaptability. The goal wasn't to kill humans, but to measure their responses to extreme challenges." Another display showed the transport ship Pioneer's Dream, which had experienced critical system failures halfway to Proxima Centauri. The human crew had performed repairs that alien engineers had initially declared impossible, jury-rigging solutions that violated established safety protocols but somehow worked perfectly. "The technical review board was amazed," Crix said, bringing up the official evaluation reports. "The humans didn't just solve the problems, they solved them in ways that our best engineers couldn't predict or replicate. They treated the entire crisis like a puzzle to be solved rather than a disaster to be survived." Jake was beginning to see the pattern. "We passed the tests." "You didn't just pass them, you exceeded every expectation," Crix confirmed. "Look at this." The final display showed comparative analyses between human responses and projected responses from other Federation species. In every scenario, humans had outperformed the predictions, often by significant margins. Where other species might have followed established emergency procedures, humans had improvised new solutions. Where others might have waited for rescue, humans had rescued themselves. "This is why I began to change my assessment of your species," Crix explained. "Every test that was designed to reveal human weaknesses instead revealed human strengths. Your unpredictability isn't a flaw, it's an advantage. Your tendency to ignore established procedures isn't recklessness, it's innovation." Jake studied the data, feeling a complex mix of pride and anger. "But they're still testing us." Crix nodded grimly. "The evaluations are ongoing, and not all of the evaluating species have reached positive conclusions. Some of them interpret human unpredictability as a long-term threat to galactic stability. They believe that a species that refuses to follow established procedures might eventually refuse to follow Federation law." "And what do they plan to do about it?" "That's what concerns me," Crix said, manipulating the displays to show a new set of documents. "I've been monitoring communications between the evaluation committee members, and there's discussion of a final assessment. Something more comprehensive and definitive than the previous tests." The new documents were heavily encrypted and partially corrupted, but Jake could make out references to comprehensive evaluation, definitive results, and final determination of status. The tone of the communications suggested that this final test would be significantly more challenging than anything humans had faced before. "When?" Jake asked. "Soon," Crix replied. "Within the next few weeks, possibly sooner. And Jake, there's something else you need to understand about this final test." Crix's expression was grave as he continued. "The previous evaluations were designed to be survivable because they were measuring capabilities, not making final judgments. But this last test is different. Some factions within the evaluation committee want humanity to fail. They're hoping that humans will demonstrate responses that justify treating your species as a threat to be contained rather than a member to be welcomed. The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. Contained how? Restricted to your home system, limited access to advanced technology, constant Federation oversight of all human activities, Crix listed. Essentially, permanent second-class status with no possibility of advancement or true independence. Jake stared at the data streams surrounding them, each one representing another piece of evidence that humanity's future was being decided by species that viewed them as test subjects rather than equals. The weight of responsibility was overwhelming. "We have to warn people," Jake said. "Warn them of what?" Crix asked. "That they're being tested by alien species they thought were allies? That their government either doesn't know or isn't telling them? That their future in the galaxy depends on passing examinations they don't even know they're taking?" Jake realized the horrible truth of their situation. Even if they could convince people that the tests were real, what could humanity do about it? They were completely dependent on Federation technology and goodwill. They had no way to resist or refuse the evaluation process. "There has to be something we can do," Jake said desperately. Crix was quiet for a long moment, studying the data with the same tactical mindset Jake had witnessed during the combat simulation. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a determination that Jake hadn't heard before. "There might be. But it would require us to do something that neither of our species is supposed to be capable of." "What?" "We'd have to work together." Jake spent the next 2 days learning more about alien communication systems than he had ever wanted to know. Crix had set up a makeshift laboratory in their living room, combining Vortac technology with human engineering principles in ways that probably violated several Federation regulations. The result was a communication array that could intercept and decode transmissions between the evaluation committee members without being detected. "The key is understanding that most alien species think in very linear patterns," Crix explained as he adjusted a crystalline component that hummed with energy. "They assume that if a communication is encrypted using established protocols, it cannot be broken by anyone who doesn't have the proper authorization codes." Jake was working on the human side of the hybrid system, adapting standard university equipment to interface with Crix's alien technology. "But they're not accounting for human creativity." "Exactly," Crix confirmed. "Your species has a tendency to approach problems from angles that others don't consider. You don't just try to break the encryption, you find ways around it entirely." The breakthrough came on the 3rd day, when Jake realized they didn't need to decode the entire message stream. Instead, they could focus on specific data patterns that indicated references to human-related topics. By filtering the communications through linguistic analysis software and looking for contextual clues rather than trying to translate everything directly, they were able to piece together fragments of the evaluation committee's plans. What they discovered was worse than either of them had expected. "They're planning to stage a pirate attack on the colony ship New Horizons," Jake said, staring at the translated fragments displayed on their improvised screen. "It's scheduled to depart for the Kepler system in 6 days. Crix nodded grimly as he cross-referenced the information with other intercepts. "The attack will be conducted by volunteers from 3 different species, using ships and weapons that can't be traced back to Federation sources. It's designed to look like a genuine pirate raid by unknown hostile forces." Jake felt sick as he realized the implications. They want to see how humans respond to a life-threatening situation when they can't rely on Federation support. "More than that," Crix said, bringing up additional data. "Look at the passenger manifest for New Horizons. It's not just adults. There are over 200 families with children on board, plus elderly colonists and people with medical conditions that make them particularly vulnerable." The test scenario was diabolical in its sophistication. A pirate attack on a colony ship full of civilians would create exactly the kind of desperate situation that might cause humans to panic, abandon their principles, or make decisions that could be interpreted as evidence of inherent aggression or instability. If the humans fight back effectively, the committee can argue that they're too dangerous to be allowed unrestricted access to Federation space, Jake realized. If they don't fight back, or if they panic and make poor decisions, the committee can argue that they're too unstable to be trusted with independence. "It's a perfect trap," Crix agreed. "No matter how the humans respond, some faction of the evaluation committee will be able to use the results to justify restricting your species." Jake stared at the data, feeling helpless. We have to warn them. How? Crix asked. Any direct communication to the ship would be monitored and traced back to us. Even if we could get a message through, what would we tell them? That they're about to be attacked by aliens pretending to be pirates as part of a test they're not supposed to know about. It seemed impossible, but as Jake thought about the problem, he began to see it the way he approached his engineering assignments. Instead of looking for a direct solution, he started thinking about indirect approaches and unconventional methods. What if we don't tell them about the test? Jake said slowly. What if we just give them information that helps them prepare for any kind of attack? Crix looked interested. How? Jake was already moving toward his computer, his mind racing with possibilities. The New Horizons is scheduled for a final systems check and supply loading over the next 4 days. During that time, they'll be running routine maintenance protocols and updating their databases with the latest navigation and safety information. You want to hack their systems? Not hack them, Jake corrected. I want to help them. What if their routine maintenance updates included some additional suggestions for improving their defensive capabilities? Things that would look like standard safety recommendations but would actually prepare them for the kind of attack the committee is planning. Crix studied the plan, his tactical training allowing him to see the potential. You're thinking of giving them weapons upgrades disguised as maintenance procedures. Better than that, Jake said, his excitement growing as the plan developed. I'm thinking of giving them creative solutions that look like standard engineering improvements but could be adapted for defense if necessary. Over the next 18 hours, Jake and Crix worked together to create what appeared to be a routine systems update package. To anyone monitoring the communication, it would look like standard maintenance instructions sent by automated Federation systems. But hidden within the technical specifications were suggestions for modifications and improvements that could serve dual purposes. The mining equipment maintenance protocols included instructions for adjustments that would increase their efficiency while also making them potentially useful as improvised weapons. The life support system updates contained redundancy improvements that would keep people alive longer while also creating backup power sources for defensive systems. Even the children's educational software received updates that included new problem-solving games that were actually tactical training exercises in disguise. The beauty of this approach is that it doesn't require them to know they're being tested, Jake explained as he put the finishing touches on the package. They'll implement these improvements because they look useful and logical. But if they're attacked, they'll have options available that the evaluation committee isn't expecting. Crix reviewed the technical specifications with the eye of a military professional. This is impressive work, Jake. You've essentially weaponized routine maintenance procedures without making them look like weapons at all. That's the human way, Jake said with a grin. We turn everything into tools, and we turn tools into whatever we need them to be. The transmission was sent through a network of relay stations that made it impossible to trace back to its source. To the monitoring systems, it appeared to originate from the standard Federation maintenance database and was delivered through normal automated channels. Now we wait, Crix said as they shut down their improvised communication array. How will we know if it worked? Jake asked. We monitor the evaluation committee communications, Crix replied. If the plan is successful, we should see some very surprised aliens in about a week. Jake nodded, but he was already thinking about the next problem. Crix, what happens after this test? Even if the humans on New Horizons pass with flying colors, there will be other tests, other evaluation scenarios. We can't keep intervening without eventually being caught. Crix was quiet for a long moment before answering. Then we need to find a way to change the game entirely. What do you mean? I mean that instead of helping humans pass tests they don't know they're taking, maybe it's time to help them understand what's really happening, Crix said. The evaluation process only works if the subjects remain unaware of it. But what if they knew? What if humanity understood that they were being judged by species who had already made up their minds? Jake realized what Crix was suggesting. You want to expose the entire program. I want to give humanity the choice to participate in their own evaluation, Crix corrected. Right now, your species is being judged based on how you respond to situations that have been artificially created by others. But what if you could respond to the evaluation process itself? What if you could show the galaxy not just how humans handle crises, but how they handle the knowledge that they're being systematically tested by species they thought were allies? The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. Jake could imagine the chaos that would result from such a revelation, but he could also imagine the possibilities it might create. That would definitely be unpredictable, Jake said. Yes, Crix agreed with a smile. And if there's one thing I've learned about humans, it's that your unpredictability is your greatest strength.